Southern California is long regarded as America's Golden State. But it is also the favored hunting ground for the depraved and sadistic.
There's not a lot of evidence. There's no clothing or any of her personal belongings left behind.
But little do authorities know, they are about to be face to face with one of America's deadliest serial killers, who would go on a killing rampage for over 10 years before they even know he exists. On a warm night in Mission Viejo, California, January 18th, 1986, a serial killer is hunting. 23-year-old Saddleback College communications student Robbin Brandley is about to become his first victim. He veers off the interstate for the college. Then he idles around the dimly lit parking lot, confident his chances are high in finding some young, unsuspecting woman on campus.
Robbin has just finished volunteering for a piano recital at a performing arts center. Unfortunately, she's a young woman in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He lurks in the shadows, stalking her before grabbing her from behind. For the briefest of moments, he holds her tight, quickly glancing to make sure no witnesses are around. Robbin is terrified, pulling at his hand, trying to scream for help.
Soon after she gave up her purse, he began to stab her multiple times.
He keeps stabbing even after she's down. He keeps at it, in fact, until the car moving through the parking lot scares him off.
Her body is discovered moments after the attack by a college professor.
An individual who had been given a ride to her car came upon the scene and immediately notified the authorities, called 911.
Orange County homicide detectives arrive on the scene to one of the most gruesome killings they have ever encountered in Mission Viejo.
Robbin was stabbed 41 times. She was laying in a pool of her own blood next to her car. Next to her body was her open purse. Nothing was taken.
The professor is asked to ID the body. She can barely say her name, she's so upset. Robbin was her student.
They had very little, if anything, to go on. They had no solid leads. They could not even determine a motive. There was no evidence a robbery had taken place. The police had to assume that her killer must have known her. There must have been some personal connection, some personal reason for this horrific crime.
Robbin's murder whips into a sensationalized media storm, criticizing homicide investigators' inability to produce a prime suspect.
They could find no offender. They had no solid leads to go on.
One can only imagine how traumatic this is for Robbin's family.
Initially, when the phone would ring in the beginning, like the first year or two, I would think, oh, maybe that's the sheriff. They're going to tell us that they've made an arrest. And then after the years went on, it just like, I'd really pretty much given up hope.
With all investigative avenues exhausted, Robbin Brandley's murder ends up in Orange County Homicide's cold case files. But what authorities do not know is that Robbin is just the beginning. 2,000 miles away, and 10 years later, in the district of Wolf Lake, south of Chicago proper, he strikes again.
Mid-April of 1996, a person during the morning hours, a nature walker of sorts, was walking near Wolf Lake, near the shoreline, when he discovered a nude body of a female floating face down. He immediately called 911, and both police from Hammond, Indiana, as well as the Chicago police arrived. It was discovered that the body was on the Illinois side of the lake. So the Chicago police had jurisdiction over this matter.
There's not a lot of evidence. There's no clothing or any of her personal belongings left behind.
Wolf Lake is a very, very remote, secluded lake between the Illinois-Indiana border of an industrial area. Certainly at night, it was a perfect place to be alone with somebody.
With no way to identify the young woman, detectives hope the autopsy will shed some light.
They found no identification anywhere near her body, no clothes. It was a mystery at that point, and she was considered a Jane Doe.
With Jane Does, dental records and fingerprints are typically run through police files.
They had to wait for the body to dry out before they could take her fingerprints. They did discover that she had a tattoo of a heart on her body.
A fingerprint match reveals the victim is 24-year-old Laura Ulacki of Hammond, Indiana.
Laura had a previous arrest for prostitution in 1995, so her fingerprints came up in the system.
There had been 2 gunshot wounds, one in Laura's face and another behind her shoulder. There were bullets lodged in her body. Those bullets were recovered by the medical examiner and sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, where they were found to be .38 caliber bullets.
Police begin to look into Laura's life for possible clues that might help identify her killer.
Laura came from a big family. She had a lot of friends.
Around the time of her death, she was beginning to frequent some bars and clubs in Hammond. She was beginning to use drugs and getting involved with the wrong people.
Whether she'd been paid for sex by her killer is a possibility, which means there's a high probability she met him in the clubs she frequented in and around Hammond. And her murder turns into another cold case, leaving Chicago detectives stumped.
A young student's savage murder on campus stuns the community of Mission Viejo and sends panic throughout the college. But the case goes cold when another girl turns up dead in a suburban lake near Chicago 10 years later. Investigators have no idea they're dealing with a serial killer, a killer who is but a ghost.
While still investigating Laura Ulacki's murder with no real breakthroughs, another girl is found in the Vermilion River a couple hours south of Wolf Lake.
She had been shot several times. She had been stabbed. And like Laura's body, it was nude in a body of water with no identification. Fishermen had come to the Vermilion River, discovered her body, and immediately called the police. Her body was taken to the medical examiner there in Livingston County.
Medical examiners find that she had been handcuffed and duct tape had been placed over her mouth.
They did discover that she had a tattoo of CC on her body.
She's identified as 21-year-old Cassandra Coram.
She was a young lady in the Hammond, Indiana area. Cassandra Coram's family had sent out a flyer looking for her. They had reported her missing, and they were obviously very concerned about her. And it wasn't until this tattoo was identified and pictures of Cassie was shown to her family, and they identified her.
Considering that Cassandra is also from Hammond, it suggests whoever killed her is hunting in the same place, but disposing of victims somewhere else.
During the autopsy, the medical examiner had revealed that Cassie had been shot 3 times. One of the bullets was lodged in her body. That bullet was also sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, where it was found to also be a .38 caliber bullet.
A month later, a third victim ends up in Wolf Lake, in what is to be known as the Wolf Lake murders. August 2nd, 1996, 22-year-old Lynn Huber, a known prostitute from Chicago, is also murdered.
Almost in the identical location where Laura had been dumped months earlier, and he dumped Lynn Huber's body in Wolf Lake. Lynn's body is removed from the water and taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. The medical examiner found a bullet lodged in her body that also was a .38 caliber bullet. All of those bullets were examined by the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, and it was determined that all of the women were killed by the same gun.
April 1st, 1997. Officers respond to a disturbance call between a known prostitute and her client at a Hammond hotel.
They had gone on, dates in the past. All of those dates ended up at Wolf Lake, where there would be sex in exchange for money.
She tells police that they had been arguing about money.
This lady had stolen some checks from a checkbook he had in his glove compartment. This infuriated him. They got into an argument during which he was chasing her around the truck with a knife, trying to kill her. The police were called, but by then he left the scene.
She starts telling the police he wants to drive out to Wolf Lake, take me in the back of his pickup truck, handcuff me, and have sex.
While he's listening to her, he recognizes the man's name from a previous arrest.
Following the motel incident, the officer reviews his prior firearm violation arrest of a South Chicago mall security guard named Andrew Urdiales, who tells him he's a former Marine.
He's so sure of his hunch that he prepares a supplemental report suggesting that this former Marine is a prime suspect in the Wolf Lake killings.
November of 1996, he was working on patrol in Hammond, Indiana, when he and other officers came upon a crack house. Urdiales and his pickup truck and an unknown female were sitting in the truck out in front of this crack house. They approached the vehicle. They were interviewing Urdiales and this young lady, during which a search of the vehicle revealed a .38 caliber pistol. Urdiales told the Hammond police officers he was a security guard. He used the pistol for work.
Urdiales was not licensed to carry a gun in the state of Indiana, so officers charged him with a misdemeanor and they confiscated the weapon. A judge later ordered that the gun be destroyed.
Chicago district detectives have no clue a link exists between 3 recent murders of local prostitutes and a college student murdered 10 years prior in California. The 3 Chicago area murders have all been committed using the same gun, a .38 revolver. Hammond, Indiana police have just linked a .38 revolver in their custody to a former mall security guard named Andrew Urdiales.
Now, the Hammond, Indiana Police Department communicated all of this information to the Chicago Police Department when that gun was analyzed with all of the bullets from Lori Olaki's body, Cassandra Corum's body, and Lynn Huber's body. And scientists from the Illinois State Police were able to determine that that gun, to the exclusion of every gun in the world, was the gun that was used in shooting all of those bullets and all of those women. It was Andrew Urdiales' gun.
Detectives interview Andrew Urdiales.
So they asked him where he got the gun from. He tells them he bought it for $300 5 months ago in Calumet City. He's almost matter-of-fact about it.
And they asked him, did you ever let anybody use this gun besides yourself? He goes, no, absolutely not. The detectives then told Urdiales that that gun was used to kill the 3 women, the pictures of whom was laying out in front of him. He looked at the detectives, he smiled, he stood up and he said, well, I guess I'm not going to work today. He took off his duty belt, he took off his security guard badge, and then he proceeded to tell the detectives how he killed Lori Olaki, Cassandra Corum, and Lynn Huber.
Urdiales shocks Cook County detectives when he tells them California authorities might also be interested to hear what he has to tell them. Cook County Homicide invites California's detective investigating the Robbin Brandley case to Chicago's Area 2 headquarters. Urdiales tells investigators about how he came to be in California at the time of Robbin's murder.
From 1984 to 1991, he was a communications officer in the Marines. He was stationed at Camp Pendleton just north of San Diego. He wasn't too popular in the Marines. In fact, he was given the nickname Corporal Urinalysis. Eventually, in his police interview, he gets around to the night he killed Robbin Brandley. According to his confession, he got into an argument with some of his subordinates at Camp Pendleton, which set him off. Basically, his rage sent him speeding down Interstate 5 through San Clemente into the Saddleback campus. It's later in the evening by the time he gets there, but he notices a few cars still in the parking lot. He basically took a position in the shadows and waited. Robbin Brandley was just a random female. It could have been anybody as far as he was concerned.
I said I wanted it first, and it's like, just, what happens then?
Well, what happens then?
Then I just plunged into her several times.
Into where?
Her back.
He finds his second victim in the Coachella Valley in Cathedral City, just south of Palm Springs.
There's no shortage of prostitutes and runaway girls in Cathedral City. It's a very transient area. The second victim is Julie McGee, a known prostitute around town. It's only a few months later he strikes again in San Diego. Marianne Wells is a single mother, a mature student, and she moonlights as a sex trade worker.
Marianne Wells was left in an alley in an industrial area of San Diego, California.
He's getting more confident, but along with this arrogance, his urge is now impossible to resist. He's going to keep killing until he gets stopped.
In Palm Springs, Urdiales finds his fourth and youngest victim, 18-year-old Tammy Irwin.
Tammy Irwin was left in the desert in the Palm Springs, California area. The bodies of Julie McGee, Marianne Wells, and Tammy Irwin were found to have 45 caliber bullets in them. Those bullets were determined by authorities in California to be fired by the same gun. When Marianne Wells' body was discovered by San Diego police, there was a condom near her body. DNA samples were obtained from him, and it was discovered that was the DNA of Andrew Urdiales. So you had physical evidence that linked Urdiales to the Marianne Wells' murder, coupled with the ballistic evidence that linked her murder to Julie McGee and Tammy Irwin, coupled with his detailed confessions to killing all three of those women. And by the end of April 1997, everybody knew that Andrew Urdiales was a serial killer, leaving victims in both Illinois and California.
Ballistics connects Chicago mall security and former Marine Andrew Urdiales to a string of violent, gruesome murders in Illinois and California.
Me and my partners were tasked with prosecuting Urdiales in Cook County, Illinois for the Chicago murders, specifically the murders of Lori Ulacki and Lynn Huber.
Following his arrest, Andrew Urdiales is held in a county correctional center for 4 years before he's tried in court. Andrew Urdiales' trial for the murders of Laura Ulacki and Lynn Huber begins on April 8, 2002.
The jury heard all of the evidence, the brutality of the murders of Laura, Lynn, and Cassandra, the physical evidence linking the defendant to all three of these crimes, the detailed confessions provided by Urdiales to not one but two different assistant state's attorneys. After 6 weeks, the jury had convicted Andrew Urdiales of the murders of Laura Ulacki and Lynn Huber and had decided that Andrew Urdiales should get the death penalty.
A little under a year later, the sitting Illinois governor blanket commutes 167 death row inmates, including Urdiales.
So what happened next is Urdiales is on Illinois death row. There was a commutation of Andrew Urdiales' sentence from death in 2 separate counties with all of this evidence to natural life in prison. And keep this in mind, inherent in the insanity defense is an admission by the defendant that he did it. He's just claiming that because of his mental illness, he's not responsible for his actions, all right? So this wasn't a case of a wrongful conviction or some other guy did it, not me. This clearly was overwhelming evidence that he killed these 3 Illinois women. Thank God the authorities in California decided to charge Urdiales for the 5 California murders.
Orange County prosecutors extradite him for the California murders. It takes 7 years to get him back in court.
The California trial took place in 2018. The California jury, based on all of this overwhelming evidence, clearly did the right thing, found Urdiales guilty of all of these crimes.
Andrew Urdiales is found guilty and sentenced to death for the 3rd time in California.
Obviously, all of the families of the victims were extremely relieved. Finally, after so many years, they received justice. Unfortunately, they'll never be made whole again, but there is some closure, at least, provided to all of these family members of all of these victims that the person responsible for all of these crimes has been held responsible. So there has to have been relief for all of these people, and thank God that they finally got it.
November 2nd, 2018, 11:15 p.m. Andrew Urdiales commits suicide by hanging in his cell. He is 54 years old.